911 operators, what call scares you till this day? Former 911 operator here. Sometimes the calls that stick with you aren't the most physically traumatic. I once had a call from a 17-year-old kid who came home from a sleepover to find that his mother had moved. Just packed up his sister and everything in the house and left while he was gone with no forwarding address or information. She also turned off his cell phone that morning, so literally the only number he could call was 911. He was trying so hard not to cry and his voice was shaking as he kept apologizing to me for calling 911. He just didn't know what else to do and had no other family. She also took everything, so all he had was a couple of things that he had taken to the friend's house. He told me his 18th birthday was in a couple of weeks and he literally had nothing. The officers that responded took him to a shelter. I think about him often and I hope he's okay. Even if he was a kid who got in trouble or had behavioral issues, I can't imagine coming home to find your mother has abandoned you.
Not one specific call, but suicide calls where the caller has no interest in seeking help but just wanting the police to find them before their family does. Knowing you're likely the last person to speak to someone and there's nothing you can do to help is pretty rough.
Family member worked as police dispatcher. Received a call from an elderly woman. Her husband had just been killed in their garage by an intruder. She heard it happening. She's wheelchair bound but phone was next to her. She frantically begged my family member to help her. While he was on the phone with her, the criminal cut her throat. My family member stayed on the line 3 more minutes until cops got there. He could hear the sounds of the attack, her gasping and gurgling noises. He kept telling her help was coming and to hold on. Amazingly, she survived. Criminal was later caught. A 17-year-old who just wanted the thrill of killing someone and picked them at random. He's on death row now.
I was a 911 operator. When I asked for the address, I got an angry man yelling, "Just get the beep ambulance here." When I asked what happened, the caller said, "You don't need to beep, know that. I just need to know what happened so I know who to send and what equipment to bring, sir. Just send a goddamn ambulance, my kid's having a seizure. Don't send any beep police. Don't send police." Coming from a caller is basically them telling on themselves. Please send police, because the patient or the EMS crew or both could be in danger. So I passed a note to my partner, who was dispatching, "Send PD." Extremely uncooperative caller. I tried my best to get through the rest of the questions. How old is the kid? Are they conscious? Are they breathing? Has the seizing stopped? Etc. I got nothing but verbal abuse. All I knew is that a pediatric patient had a seizure when the call started, there was yelling in the background, and there was some terrible yelling in the foreground. Put your hands up. Hey, what the beep beep, and that was it. Police had the caller. The patient ended up being a toddler, who had been beaten to within an inch of their life by that asshole. That was terrifying and sad, and I hugged my own kid a little tighter that night.
Every call where someone is reporting an unresponsive relative. Some will let you walk them through the CPR process if they don't know it, some won't. Every one of them you hear the caller at some point pleading with the patient to not leave them. Most times they do though. Parents, spouses, children, I've had them all call. Never gets easier.
Not scared, just kinda haunted. This past Mother's Day, I had a teenage boy calling because he found his mother overdosed and dead. The sobbing as he called out, "Mom! Mom!" still makes me tear up.
Didn't really scare me, but touched me deeply. Lady calls in. She stopped to visit elderly couple she knew because she had not heard from them. The elderly man had dementia. Apparently his wife died in her sleep days before and he didn't realize and had been getting in bed with her nightly.
Not an operator but heard the story. The woman had gotten out of her car and shut the door and went around to get her infant out of the car seat. As she walked to the kid's door, the car locked itself and she left the key inside. So this kid is stuck in the car and it is a hot summer day, so she immediately calls 911. Well, the operator told her it did not qualify as an emergency and hung up. So the mom picked up a branch and smashed the back windshield and rescued her kid. Operator got fired.
I wasn't, but my dad's longtime GF was a 911 operator. She was an absolute angel on earth, but she had the most heartbreaking stories. Worst I can think of was an older woman who called 911 because her husband had locked himself in their bedroom and refused to come out, despite her begging and pleading. The lady exclaimed, "He's in there and he has a gun, please hurry." While the operator was trying to keep her calm and talk her down, she heard the unmistakable pop of a gun. I can't imagine the wailing on the other end of the phone after that poor lady had to listen to her husband committing suicide through the door.
I have two. 1. Call from a male who stated he'd found his girlfriend's son unresponsive. Very frantic caller. He and the mother passed the phone back and forth multiple times while I tried to give various rescue instructions. That part wasn't all that abnormal, but they later took the male into custody and I found out the initial caller had strangled the kid and then freaked out and called. Still makes me mad and it's been years. 2. Not mine, but a call they played for us in state training. An elderly man had a complete psychotic break and killed his wife with a hammer. Afterward he calmly called 911 and confessed. The dispatcher attempted to give rescue instructions, up until he realized the damage was extensive enough that her head was mostly gone. Several of the first officers on scene were violently ill because of how bloody the house was.
I'm going to do another one because this thread is a bummer and we all need a laugh. I assure you, not making any of this up. There was a ranch on the edge of the city limits in my area, right by a large park and swimming hole. That ranch had a variety of livestock, but they had an issue with their pygmy goats. Every few weeks we'd get a call because 100 little goats were roving through the park or down the street. One day, I took that call from a man in the park who had been chased by the goats into a porta potty. He was frantic, like, screaming, "You need to send animal control out here right now." And all the while, I could hear two other prominent, repeated sounds, the whack of little goat noggins rattling against the plastic porta potty, and bleating. Malevolent, incessant bleating. What did those goats want? What would they have done, had he not found refuge? We'll never know. Edit. Typo fix.
I was a 911 operator. I get a call one night of a woman crying. Not abnormal, people don't tend to call 911 on good days. She's crying but trying to hold it together. Her son fell in the bathroom and isn't responding to her. She can crack open the door a little bit but can't open it because he has fallen against the door and the bathroom is small. She can see in, a little bit. Her grown-up son is living with her. He went into the bathroom to do some drugs. I don't know what kind, but it was the kind you inject with a needle. We know this because she can see the needle hanging from his arm. I asked if this had ever happened before. She said yes. She gave me his age, mid-20s, and her address and some other things I needed. While I'm talking to her, I can hear in every word this woman speaks the tremendous love and fear of a mother for her child. Her son is dying, or is dead, and she knows it, but she can't do anything but stay as calm as possible to answer my questions. She was holding on, but I could hear it in her voice. He was in his 20s, but it was her baby dying on that floor and she couldn't do a thing about it. That was about 8 years ago. I still feel upset when I think about that call even now. Rescue got there and he did live, but that doesn't change how I remember feeling. That poor mother.
Not scary, but will definitely stick with me for the rest of my life. Answered a 911 call about an unresponsive male driver passed out at a stop sign. I got the info and dispatched units to the scene. Realized moments later that the vehicle the caller described was my own. It was my 26-year-old son who had overdosed on heroin and Xanax. He was at a road literally 100 feet from dispatch and EMS. We made it there at the same time. Narcan saved his life. He are currently in rehab for the next year, and is rocking it.
This was 10+ years ago, but one night I had a call from a woman who jumped out of a moving vehicle to escape a sex assault. Suspect was an ex-boyfriend who had done it in the past. Luckily she was still able to run, but she was definitely injured and had no idea where she was, and this was when a cell phone's location was just the closest cell tower. She was, understandably, hysterical, and I spent the first few minutes trying to get her calm and quiet enough to avoid detection. She found one of those big green electrical boxes to hide behind for a few minutes while the suspect drove back and forth looking for her. Once she couldn't see the headlights anymore, she was able to coherently speak to me, and we determined she was in an office park. There were building numbers, but she wasn't near a street sign, so that wasn't very helpful. I told her to check the nearest mailbox and to read me the address on any mail that she could find. It took her a minute or two of running behind buildings to locate a mailbox, but when she did, we were able to pinpoint her location. Half of the deputies in my county responded, and the happy ending to the story is that the suspect was still in the office park, and when he tried to flee on foot, Chewy caught up to him and made the arrest. Oh, Chewy was a 120-pound German Shepherd who served a long and distinguished career at my agency Smile. This wasn't a call that necessarily keeps me up at night, but it was the scariest in the moment call I ever took.
I shadowed a 911 operator. We got a call from an 8-year-old who said his big brother was in the bathroom and hasn't been out for an hour and there was no sound. He broke the door open somehow while he was on the phone with us, and his brother was dead from suicide, hanging. This was small town, and a year prior that same older brother had called in when the mom had committed suicide herself on pills. Hearing that kid cry will always haunt me. I decided not to become a 911 operator.
My dad wasn't a 911 operator, but a deputy sheriff in a small town. In the late 70s, his sister caught her boyfriend in bed with another woman. She tried to emasculate him with a 12-gauge shotgun, but instead severed his femoral artery and he bled out immediately. My dad was the only law enforcement officer on call that night. I remember him getting the phone call. He had to go investigate the scene, and then found his sister at a nearby bar. He arrested her there, and she eventually went to prison. I can't imagine having to incarcerate my own sister. He's a tough, honorable guy.
Former 999 call taker here. One call that stayed with me was from a woman whose daughter was choking on pizza. She had the phone on speaker, which was needed because just after giving the address the caller just started screaming. The most hair-raising screaming I'd ever heard. Then she started screaming, "She's dead, she's dead, she's dead," over and over again. Her husband was following my instructions in the background, no idea how he could hear me over the screaming. The crew got there quickly, but the patient didn't make it. Just by typing this out I can hear her screaming again.
Apartment fire, woman burned alive on her balcony because she was too afraid to jump. The screams over the radio of the fire crews trying to rescue her. 20 minutes later we get a call for a young man that walked in front of a dump truck on a highway to take his own life. While crews were responding to that, a 10-year-old girl who hung herself was found by her mother. I was still quite new the day all this happened, but I will never forget what I heard that day.
Former 911 operator, dispatcher. I only did the job for a few months, but there are 2 calls that stick with me. Call number 1, 911 terminal goes off and I answer. On the other end of the line there a woman screams, "He's raping me, please help." I ask her that she's just been raped, as most people tend to report crimes as if they are just happening when most times that crime has already occurred and finished. She screams, "No, he's raping now." This woman is actively being raped while on the phone. We get police dispatched and try to locate her, but her phone is pinging in the middle of a cornfield and she's saying she's in an alley. Finally, after 10 minutes of listening to this woman being attacked, she gets away and gets to a house where we locate her. Her attacker got away. Call number 2, due to a batch of heroin that was heavily laced with fentanyl coming out of Ohio, southern Indiana had one of the worst nights for overdoses. Narcan was scarce. For 8 hours we fielded an overdose call at least every 30 minutes. The one that broke me though came near the end of the shift. 911 terminal goes off and I answer. On the other end a 10-year-old boy states that his father is not breathing and turning blue. I ask if his dad was eating something or did he suddenly collapse, etc. Boy states his dad has a needle in his arm and he thinks his medicine is bad. I get the boy to unlock his door and the medical team and police arrive. Later the officer who arrived let me know the dad didn't make it. I cannot tell you how horrible it is to listen to a child as they watch their parent overdose and die. To those of you thin yellow line workers still working the phone lines, thank you for being the voice on the other end of the line.
I work for the equivalent, here in the UK. Not my call, one from a training session we had going. An elderly gentleman had called 999 as he was feeling faint, tight chest and struggling to breathe. He wasn't in the house on his own, his son was downstairs, but he wanted to call in private due to his son being a worrier. He collapsed mid-call. The operator frantically dispatched somebody to go round and help. However, in the process of this, the sounds that man was making were horrific. Almost like a squeal, then turning into a grunting, high-pitched groan. I genuinely can't explain it. He sadly passed away by the time the crew had arrived down to a massive heart attack. His son didn't even know what was happening until the police and paramedics turned up. Safe to say the son was devastated and hearing him scream was just as bad. His son sadly killed himself a month later.
Nothing scared me, but there are calls that stick with you forever. Family finding another family member committed suicide. Mother calling saying a neighbor molested her young daughter. Officer shot by a guy with a warrant. Officer committing suicide. People dying while you're on the phone with them or with someone with them. I answered those calls for 16 years. I was happy to get out.
Not an operator, but about 10 years I had to do a court-mandated class at a coroner's office. In this class they have a recording of a 911 call placed by a lady whose husband had gotten so drunk he didn't recognize his own wife in their home, so he grabbed a knife thinking she was an intruder. Despite her pleading with him and calling his name, he ended up stabbing her to death. I want to say over 30 stab wounds. Her screams and begging her husband to remember were gut-wrenching. Eventually she stops making any kind of sound and you can hear their young daughter come out of her room and call out to her only to be met with silence. It's then you can tell the woman is no longer breathing. I will hear those screams and begging until the day I die.
Former Leo had a dispatcher that needed some therapy after this one. Rural County Sheriff's Office is where we worked. Dead of winter. Roads were slick with a glaze of ice on top of the driven-on, hard-packed snow. A rural mail carrier had lost control of her vehicle and rolled her Jeep Grand Cherokee on its top. Due to her delivering mail, her window was open and during the crash the vehicle had rolled on top of her arm. She was pinned but managed to call 911. While en route, we could hear the panic in our dispatcher voice when she said the vehicle had caught fire. On a summer day it would have taken us about 15 minutes running lights and sirens. Due to road conditions it took about 30. Every time my dispatcher keyed up on the mic to give us further information, I could hear the screams from the caller. By the time we got there she had expired. Our dispatcher listened and tried to talk to this woman while she was burning alive. She was absent for like a month while she got everything sorted out. I think of both of them often.
My mom wasn't a 911 operator, but she was a sexual assault center volunteer when I was in elementary school. And would get calls routed to our home number. She would talk to women who had just been raped. Just listening to her side of the call was traumatizing for me.
Used to be a dispatcher in a tiny little town. We did 911 calls at the police station. Had one of a stabbing. The guy who did the stabbing was someone I went to high school with that had been on drugs very bad. It was definitely crazy and chaotic. We didn't have a ton, like I said, very small town. Had one where the lady had a opossum under her porch, woman facebombing. Edit, lady, not last.
Firefighter, anything with kids.
May your day be filled with joy and happiness. And please remember to subscribe to Upvote for the best quality content every day.